The Dwemer didn't just build machines, they built machines that ran on the souls of gods, and then they vanished from existence because of it. Every experiment they ever conducted follows the same disturbing logic. Reality is a system, and systems can be hacked. Today I'm breaking down every single Dwemer experiment in the Elder Scrolls, and exactly how each one worked. Starting with one you've walked past 100 times without realizing what it actually is. The Skyforge tonal metallurgy. There's a giant stone bird sitting on top of a forge in Whiterun, and nobody thinks that's weird. A massive phoenix statue, wings spread, perched directly above a fire pit where the companions burn their dead. Death and rebirth, staring you right in the face every time you walk up to buy a steel sword from Yorlin. Which is, not ideal as a mental image. But here's where it gets interesting. After Codlac Whitemane dies and his body is cremated at the Skyforge, Yorlin Greymane says something most players skip right past. He says the Skyforge feels more awake, not warmer, not louder, awake. Like a dead man's funeral was its alarm clock. And right on cue, new crafting recipes unlock. Nord hero weapons, ancient Nord armor, gear that literally did not exist as an option 5 minutes earlier. You burn a legendary warrior on this forge, and suddenly the forge knows how to make better stuff. Before you dismiss that as a quirky game mechanic, hear me out. The Dwemer socketed soul gems into individual constructs. 1 soul per centurion, 1 gem per spider. That's a retail transaction. The Skyforge is doing something different. It's distributing heroic soul energy across the entire forge like a network. Every cremation is a calibration pass, tuning the forge's resonance a little higher, a little sharper. You're not powering one machine, you're upgrading firmware. Now, here's the thing. There are 0 Dwemer inscriptions at the Skyforge. Every primary source ties it to Kine, to Nordic mythology, to ancient Atmaran tradition. This is the most speculative entry on the list, and I'm putting it first on purpose. Because if you can't trust me to tell you when the evidence is thin, you won't trust me when I tell you the evidence is overwhelming, and it will be. But the core logic, souls as technical fuel that upgrades a physical system, that's not speculation. That's the smallest version of an idea the Dwemer scaled all the way up to planetary soul batteries and a 1,000-foot brass deity powered by the heart of a dead god. One hero's cremation makes a forge wake up. Imagine what happens when you run that same logic at civilizational scale. If you think a forge getting smarter from burning one body is unsettling, wait until you hear what the Dwemer did to an entire race of elves who made the mistake of asking them for help. Blindness of the Snow Elves. The Snow Elves weren't some minor tribe hiding in caves. They were the dominant elven civilization in Skyrim during the Merethic era, with their own sophisticated culture, their own architecture, their own everything. And when the Night of Tears forced them from the surface, they did what any desperate people would do. They turned to the one group that seemed neutral, the Dwemer. The Dwemer said yes, opened the gates, welcomed them underground, and then immediately began engineering their destruction from the inside. Here's how it worked. The Dwemer offered the Snow Elves shelter, but the price of admission was consuming toxic fungi that rendered them blind, not as a side effect, as a condition. Eat this or leave. And the Snow Elves, with nowhere else to go, ate it. Every single one of them. Over generations, blindness became total, permanent, and hereditary. An entire civilization reduced to sightless slaves working the deep levels of Dwemer cities, fully dependent, fully controlled. This wasn't an accident. This was a transaction designed to only benefit one side, and here's where it gets worse. The blindness was just the beginning. Once the Snow Elves couldn't see, the Dwemer enslaved them outright. Forced labor, total subjugation, no negotiation. Generation after generation of Snow Elves were born underground, never knowing what sunlight looked like, never knowing they'd once built temples that rivaled anything on the surface. The Dwemer didn't just blind them, they hollowed out their entire identity and replaced it with servitude, like reformatting a hard drive and installing your own operating system. But the physical degradation didn't stop at the eyes. Over centuries of enslavement, living in toxic conditions, eating whatever they could find in the deep dark, the Snow Elves devolved. Their bodies twisted, their minds deteriorated. They became the Falmer, feral, violent, barely recognizable as the civilization they'd once been. The Dwemer didn't just break a people, they unmade a species on a geological timescale. And then, in 1E700, every single Dwemer vanished. Gone. All of them. And the Falmer? The Falmer stayed. Thousands of blind, feral, fully devolved creatures left wandering through empty ruins with zero supervision and absolutely nothing to do. The Dwemer spent generations building the perfect subterranean labor force and then disappeared before clocking in on Monday. 4,000 years later, those same Falmer are still down there, eating chorus and attacking anything that moves. Knight Paladin Gelibor, the last uncorrupted Snow Elf, survives in the Forgotten Vale as living proof of what was destroyed. Standing next to him is like looking at a before photo for the worst makeover in fantasy history. But if the Snow Elves got their future stolen, wait until you hear about the Dwemer project that tore their own alliance apart from the inside. The Ethereum Forge, The Dwemer couldn't cooperate. That's basically the defining trait of the species. Every city was its own little kingdom of gears and ego, and the idea of two Dwemer factions agreeing on anything was about as likely as a mudcrab writing poetry. So when 4 entire cities, Arkanthams, Reldbethar, Musulft, and Bitharzel, formed an actual alliance in the First Era to study a newly discovered crystal called Ethereum, it was genuinely historic. It lasted about 5 minutes, but before it all went sideways, they built something incredible. See, Ethereum has a problem. It refuses to be melted down. Conventional heat does absolutely nothing to it. The crystal's internal structure is locked into some kind of rigid harmonic configuration that laughs at your furnace. You can't smelt Ethereum, you have to re-sing it. The forge uses precisely modulated tonal patterns to retune the crystal's lattice at a fundamental level, convincing it to become something new, which is, a completely normal thing to do with a rock. And the artifacts it produces are genuinely insane. The ethereal crown exploits a loophole in how Mundus calculates standing stone blessings, letting you run 2 at once. It's basically a cheat code baked into jewelry. The ethereal shield phase shifts targets into an ethereal state, temporarily removing them from physical reality, and the ethereal staff just casually summons Dwemer automatons out of thin air. These aren't enchanted items. They're portable fragments of deeper metaphysical systems that have no business being strapped to one person's arm. Even turning the forge on is a production. You have to shoot 2 kinetic resonators just to open the front door, because apparently a key was too simple. And when you insert the Ethereum crest at Bithoft, the ground shakes, a massive Dwemer globe rises out of the earth, and a lift is revealed. That theatricality isn't for show. It's the side effect of enormous stored energy finally being released. The forge had been sitting dormant for over 4,000 years, and it still had enough juice to rearrange the landscape on startup. Here's where it gets tragic, though. The alliance worked. They built something genuinely wondrous, a device that could reshape a cosmic material into artifacts that bent the rules of reality. And the instant it was finished, they immediately went to war over who got to control it. Arkanthams was destroyed. The other cities tore into each other. And the survivors were so horrified by what they'd done that they deliberately buried every scrap of knowledge about Ethereum refinement. Nobody set foot in the forge again for 4,000 years. The whole thing is a textbook tragedy of the commons. 4 cities proved the Dwemer could cooperate, and the cooperation produced something so valuable, it guaranteed they never would again. They discovered there were rules beneath the rules, figured out how to exploit them, and then destroyed each other before they could even properly use what they'd made. And if you think that's a one-time mistake, wait until you hear about the orb they left scanning for visitors in the Velothi Mountains. The Kagrenzel resonance experiment. Kagrenzel is one of the most unsettling places in Skyrim, and it barely has anything in it. That's kind of the point. You find this tiny Dwemer ruin tucked into the Velothi Mountains, and honestly, it looks like nothing. A few corridors, some stone, zero fanfare. Then you walk into the main chamber, and there's this gorgeous, glowing orb hovering above a circular platform inside a metal cage. Naturally, you walk toward it, because you're a video game protagonist, and glowing things are basically food. The orb descends, the cage closes around you, and then the orb starts slowly orbiting your body like it's reading you, scanning you, deciding something. Then the floor opens, and you fall. Not a little fall. The longest fall in the entire game. Straight down into a massive underground cavern with a pool of water at the bottom that exists solely so you don't die on impact. And surrounding that pool, bones, loot, the scattered remains of every poor idiot who walked up to the pretty light before you did. Here's where it gets genuinely creepy. There are no Dwemer here. There haven't been for over 4,000 years. But the orb is still running, still scanning, still dropping people through the floor. Nobody told it to stop, so it just kept going, piling up bodies in the dark like the world's most patient serial killer. The leading theory is that the orb is a tonal scanner, calibrated to detect Dwemer harmonic signatures. Tonal architecture was basically the Dwemer's entire operating system. They believed everything in reality had a frequency, and if you knew the right one, you could manipulate anything. So Kagrenzel's orb reads your resonance, checks it against an authorized frequency, and if you don't match, you're not turned away. You're not asked to leave. The floor just opens. They didn't build a door. They built a sorting machine that disposes of the failures. There's a complementary theory that Kagrenzel was actually an unfinished excavation site. The orb generates frequencies that fracture and suspend stone, and that enormous cavern below is the early stages of a new underground complex being sung into existence. The trapdoor might have originally been a calibration tool repurposed as a security feature, which is, not ideal for anyone who wandered in looking for treasure. And here's what makes Kagrenzel so fascinating. Zero in-game text texts describe this place. No inscriptions, no journals, no named characters. Everything we know comes from walking in, getting scanned by a floating orb, and falling into a pit full of skeletons. Pure environmental storytelling. This is Dwemer logic compressed into a single room. People are parameters. If you don't match the equation, you fall through the floor. No fungi, no generational poisoning, no pretense of shelter. Just a machine, a frequency check, and gravity. But if a single orb in a forgotten ruin can sort the living from the dead for 4,000 years without supervision, imagine what the Dwemer could do when they actually put effort into something, like capturing an Elder Scroll, downloading time. Every other experiment we've covered so far, the metallurgy, the slavery, the traps, those are all impressive in their own horrible way, but they're still grounded in things you can touch. Metal, flesh, stone. The Elder Scroll experiment is where the Dwemer stopped tinkering with the physical world and started tinkering with reality itself. Here's the thing about Elder Scrolls. They're not books. They're not even objects in any meaningful sense. They're quasi-sentient records of every possible future and every possible past, and reading one without protection has blinded people, driven them permanently insane. The moth priests who dedicate their entire lives to studying them eventually lose their sight completely, and they consider that an acceptable trait. The Dwemer looked at all of that and said, cool, let's build a machine to read it for us. And they did. The Tower of Mizark, accessible through Blackreach, contains what's called an oculory. Picture a chamber full of enormous focusing lenses, rotating concentric rings, and a receptacle slot for a lexicon, all oriented around a single suspended Elder Scroll. The entire room is basically a giant decoder pointed at an artifact that predates time. When the Dragonborn arrives, they input a precise button sequence to align the lenses. Each press shifts the rings, redirects the focal point, and when the alignment locks in, a beam of focused light strikes the scroll and encodes its data directly into the lexicon below. They turned cosmic revelation into a file transfer. The lexicon itself is a small cube, basically a Dwemer USB drive that can hold information extracted from an artifact tied to Akatosh's own perception of time. Instead of a person reading the scroll and going blind, the machine reads it, compresses the output, and saves it to a device you can carry in your pocket. The Dragonborn later uses this inscribed lexicon to open Septimus Cygnus's lockbox, and the Elder Scroll itself, read at the time wound on the throat of the world, lets them witness ancient Nords using Dragonrend against Alduin. They experience a moment outside their own native timeline. That's not metaphor. That literally happens. But here's where it gets complicated. The Tower of Mizark isn't a vault where they locked something dangerous away for safekeeping. It's a workstation. The lenses, the rings, the lexicon slot, every single component exists to interact with the scroll on a mechanical level. That kind of confidence in handling an artifact directly tied to a god's perception of time is either visionary engineering or a preview of exactly the kind of arrogance that gets your entire civilization erased from existence. And there's a theory that makes the whole thing even worse. If the Dwemer used lexicons to extract and model branching future timelines, they may have believed their success was cosmically inevitable. They could have looked at every possible outcome and convinced themselves that Numidium was always going to work, which would explain why Kagranak struck the heart of Lorcan with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already seen the ending. Turns out he hadn't. But if you think reading the future is disturbing, wait until you hear what they were doing with souls underneath Blackreach, the soul box of Blackreach. Septimus Cygnus lives in an ice cave north of Winterhold, and the man is absolutely losing his mind, which, to be fair, is understandable, because sitting in the middle of his cave is a colossal Dwemer lockbox covered in interlocking faces and geometric panels that washed in on a mysterious flood. Nobody knows where it came from, but Septimus is convinced it contains the heart of Lorcan, and he has spent years trying to crack it open. Here's the problem. The lockbox is sealed with what is essentially a biometric blood lock, and the only blood it accepts is Dwemer blood, which would be fine, except every single Dwemer in Tamriel has been gone for over 4,000 years. So Septimus hands you an essence extractor and tells you to go collect blood from 5 different Mer races, because if you blend them all together, the genetic composite is close enough to fool the mechanism. You're basically making knockoff Dwemer DNA in a blender, which is, not ideal, but it works. The lockbox opens, and inside is not the heart of Lorcan. Inside is the Ogma Infinium, a Daedric artifact belonging to Hermaeus Mora, the Prince of Forbidden Knowledge. A Daedric prince used a Dwemer security vault as his personal safe deposit box. The Dwemer built a lock so sophisticated that that a being with power over all forbidden knowledge in existence looked at it and said, yeah, that'll hold my stuff. Both options, that the Dwemer engineered something a god respected or that Mora co-opted it because nobody else could crack it, are terrifying. The moment you open it, Mora appears, obliterates Septimus on the spot, and casually mentions that the Dwemer were the last mortals to directly touch the heart. Then he's gone. Cool, that's also a thing that happened. But here's where it gets bigger. The lockbox is just one node. The real infrastructure is underneath you. Blackreach is not a cave, it's a city. A massive underground cavern connecting Alftand, Mzinchileft, and Raldbthar into a single network, packed with Ethereum deposits, soul gem geodes, Falmer colonies, and a hidden dragon that most players don't even know exists. The entire cavern floor is covered in glowing mushrooms, and these aren't decorative. They're absorbing ambient magicka radiating up from deep earth mineral deposits and re-emitting it as visible light. They're eating magic and sweating out a glow. Now layer in the automatons. Every Dwemer machine in these ruins runs on soul gems, and there's a compelling model where the gems aren't just batteries. Semi-bound soul fragments continuously siphon ambient magicka from the environment and reintegrate into the automaton soul gems, creating a self-sustaining energy loop that has been running uninterrupted for thousands of years. Nobody is maintaining these machines. The system just keeps going, feeding itself. And the fungal network may be doing something even stranger. Some analysts believe it functions as a single massive organism, a mycelial hive transmitting chemical or magical signals across the entire cavern. If that's true, Blackreach is simultaneously a sensor web, an energy grid, and a crude biological processor built from mushrooms instead of brass. The Dwemer didn't just build infrastructure down here, they grew it. So when Hermaeus Mora uses a Dwemer lockbox as a filing cabinet, it starts to make sense. Blackreach's soul cycles and fungal networks may have functioned as a metaphysical antenna, broadcasting tonal patterns powerful enough for cosmic entities to tune into. Mora didn't stumble onto this system, he heard it, and that antenna is exactly why what happened next was so catastrophic. Because when Kagranak struck the heart of Lorcan, that signal propagated through the entire network at once. Every connected node, every soul gem, every Dwemer mind linked to the system, all of it, hit simultaneously. But if you think a soul antenna is extreme, wait until you see what the Dwemer plugged it into, building the Numidium. Kagranak's official title was Chief Tonal Architect and High Priest of the Dwemer, Engineer and High Priest. Same guy, same job. Because by this point in Dwemer history, the line between building machines and building gods had completely evaporated. And the thing he built proves it. Numidium, also called Anumidium, or the brass god depending on who you ask, was a humanoid golem roughly 1,000 feet tall, made of brass, shaped like a person, designed to be powered by the heart of a dead god. You know, casual Thursday afternoon project. But here's the thing, Numidium wasn't just a really big robot. In Elder Scrolls cosmology, there are structures called towers, metaphysical anchors that hold reality together. White Gold Tower, Red Mountain, the Adamantine Tower, they all stabilize the world by connecting it to fundamental forces. Each tower has a stone, a keystone artifact that lets it do its job. Numidium was designed to be an artificial tower, a man-made axis of reality, and its stone was going to be the heart of Lorcan. Let me say that differently, so it lands properly. Kagranak wasn't building a weapon. He was building a replacement for the cosmological order his people rejected. The Dwemer looked at the gods, said those are just systems running on better hardware, and then tried to build their own system from scratch. Numidium was supposed to anchor a new version of reality powered by the divine spark of a god the other gods had already murdered, which is, you know, not ideal as a design philosophy. The heart would give Numidium the ability to influence the actual fabric of existence, not just punch things really hard, although it could absolutely do that too. We're talking about a construct that could rewrite the rules of causality, and we know this because centuries after every single Dwemer vanished from Tamriel, other people got their hands on it and proved the concept worked. Tiber Septim acquired Numidium along with a new power source called the Mantella, a massive gem loaded with enough divine energy to substitute for the heart. He used it to subjugate every remaining independent kingdom on the continent. Just walked a 1,000-foot brass god across Tamriel and said, hey, you're part of the Empire now. Continental unification? Done. But the real fun came later. During the events of Daggerfall, multiple factions simultaneously got hold of the Totem of Tiber Septim, the control device for Numidium. All of them activated it at the same time. The result was a dragon break. Time itself shattered into parallel timelines where mutually exclusive outcomes all happened at once. And when time stitched itself back together, all of those outcomes became true simultaneously. Every faction won, every faction lost. History just kind of shrugged and moved on. Numidium didn't just destroy armies, it destroyed timelines. And here's where the dark irony really bites. The Dwemer were right. Their construct absolutely could affect reality at the level of causality. The math worked. The engineering was sound. Their only mistake was assuming they'd survive turning it on. Numidium outlasted them by millennia, was used by their conquerors to build an empire and broke time twice, making the Dwemer simultaneously the most successful and most catastrophically unsuccessful engineers in the history of Tamriel. They built a god that works perfectly. They just weren't around to see it. But if Numidium was the hardware, the heart of Lorkhan was the operating system. And what Kagrenac actually did to that heart is where this whole story goes from ambitious to apocalyptic, siphoning the heart of Lorkhan. Every experiment we've covered so far, the blind elves, the brass robots, the soul batteries, all of it was practice, warm-up reps, because this is the one that mattered. This is the experiment that ended the Dwemer. Here's what happened. Dwemer miners digging beneath Red Mountain hit something that shouldn't exist. Buried since the literal dawn of time, sitting there like a cosmic landmine, was the heart of Lorkhan. The divine spark ripped out of a god when the other gods punished him for creating the mortal world. It had been sitting underground for eons, quietly holding Red Mountain together as its tower stone, and the Dwemer just stumbled into it with pickaxes. Most civilizations would have built a temple, maybe prayed a little. The Dwemer looked at the beating heart of a dead god and said, "We can take that apart." Kagrenac, their chief tonal architect, designed 3 tools specifically for the job. Sunder, a hammer that produced major changes in the heart's energy output. Keening, a blade that made fine adjustments. And Wraithguard, a gauntlet that kept the user from dying on contact with raw divine power. 3 instruments, a surgical toolkit for performing open heart surgery on a god. And here's what makes this different from every power grab in Elder Scrolls history. Kagrenac wasn't trying to steal divinity. He was trying to prove a point. His objective was to instill godhood into the entire Dwemer race, not through worship, not through submission, but by treating the heart as a machine with adjustable parameters. Gods aren't real. Divinity is just a system, and systems can be reverse engineered. That was the thesis. He wanted his people to become immortal while staying exactly who they were, rational, skeptical, and answering to nobody. Here's where it gets complicated. We actually know this approach works, because other people used the exact same tools and pulled it off. After the Dwemer vanished, the Tribunal, Vivek, Almalexia, and Sothasil tapped the heart using Sunder and Keening. They became living gods. Real, actual, demonstrably powerful gods. But their divinity had a catch. They had to make annual pilgrimages back to Red Mountain to recharge. Even expert users couldn't set the heart's output to permanent. Kagrenac wasn't going for a maintenance plan. He was attempting a total reconfiguration. One strike, permanent results, 0 margin for error. And in 1E700, during the Battle of Red Mountain, with Nerevar's army bearing down on him, Kagrenac struck the heart. Every single Dwemer across Tamriel vanished, simultaneously. Not just the ones at Red Mountain. Every Dwemer in Skyrim, every Dwemer in Hammerfell, every single one, gone in the same instant. The only survivor was Yagrum Bagarn, and he only made it because he was physically standing in an Oblivion realm at the time, outside the reach of the Dwemer's tonal network. His survival is the strongest evidence we have that whatever happened didn't radiate outward like an explosion. It propagated through their shared consciousness like a signal. The most compelling theory is this: the heart's power cascaded through the Dwemer's civilization-wide tonal link and bound every soul to itself, not killing them, absorbing them, dissolving the boundary between individual Dwemer and the cosmic substrate they'd spent centuries trying to engineer. They didn't fail to reshape reality. They succeeded completely, and reality reshaped them right out of existence. They wanted to prove that gods were just machines, and the universe answered, correct. Welcome to the machine. But the part that still keeps people up at night is what Hermaeus Mora tells the Dragonborn. The heart was not destroyed by the Nerevarine. It's still out there. The Dwemer remain the last mortals to have directly touched it. Whatever Kagrenac did is still echoing somewhere in the Orbis, and the Dwemer souls bound into that heart song may still persist, somewhere beyond mortal reach, trapped inside the answer to their own question. The experiment never ended. It's still running. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.